trapped Apache girl said, "Please don't carry me to bed." Rancher. Instead, the sun hung low over the Arizona territory, painting the desert in shades of burnt orange and deep purple. It was the kind of evening that made a man grateful for the day's end, when the relentless heat finally loosened its grip on the land. Thomas McKenna wiped the sweat from his weathered brow as he guided his horse along the rocky trail that bordered his ranch. He was a man of 50 years, with silver streaking through his dark hair and lines carved deep around his eyes from decades of squinting against the desert sun. Thomas had been checking the fence line, a tedious but necessary task that every rancher knew by heart. The wire had to be strong, the posts firmly planted, or else the cattle would wander off into the vast wilderness where mountain lions and raiders waited. He was thinking about supper, about the stew Maria would have warming on the stove, when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it over the clip-clop of his horse's hooves. It was a whimper, soft and frightened, like an injured animal trying not to draw attention to itself. Thomas pulled his horse to a stop and listened carefully. There it was again, coming from somewhere among the rocks to his left. He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching against the dry earth as he made his way toward the sound. His hand instinctively moved to the rifle strapped to his saddle, not out of aggression but from pure habit. A man alone in this territory learned to be cautious. As Thomas climbed over a small rise, he saw her. A young girl, no more than 12 years old, was pinned beneath a massive boulder that had clearly rolled down from the hillside above. Only her upper body was visible, her small frame pressed against the unforgiving ground. Her dark hair was matted with dust and sweat, and her brown eyes widened with pure terror when she saw him approaching. Thomas stopped in his tracks. He recognized immediately that she was Apache, from the style of her torn clothing and the turquoise beads that still clung to a leather cord around her neck. His heart sank as he realized what this meant. The year was 1882, and the relationship between white settlers and the Apache people was strained at best, violent at worst. He had heard the stories, the terrible things that happened on both sides of the conflict. "Easy now," Thomas said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl said nothing. Her breathing came in short, panicked gasps, and she tried to pull herself backward, away from him, despite the boulder crushing her leg. The pain must have been extraordinary, but fear drove her movements. Thomas took a careful step closer, moving slowly as he would approach a frightened horse. "You're hurt pretty bad," he said, keeping his voice low and calm. "That rock has got you trapped. How long have you been here?" The girl's lips trembled. She understood some English. That much was clear from the way her eyes tracked his words. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. Please don't carry me to bed." The words struck Thomas like a physical blow. His stomach turned as he understood what she was truly saying, what she had been taught to fear from white men. Stories had clearly reached her people. Terrible stories of girls taken, of innocence destroyed, of cruelty that had no place in any civilized world. This child, trapped and helpless, thought he would take advantage of her vulnerability. Thomas felt a wave of sadness wash over him. He thought of his own daughter, Sarah, who would have been about this girl's age had she lived. Sarah had died 5 years ago from fever, and the loss had hollowed out something inside him that never quite filled back in. Looking at this terrified Apache child, he saw not an enemy, but simply a young girl in desperate need of help. "I'm not going to do that," Thomas said firmly, sitting down on a rock several feet away from her. "I'm going to help you get out from under that boulder, and then I'm going to help fix up your leg. That's all." The girl watched him with suspicious eyes, clearly not believing a word he said. Thomas couldn't blame her. Words were cheap, especially between people who had every reason to distrust each other. "My name is Thomas," he continued, pulling his canteen from his belt. "I have a ranch just over that ridge. I live there with Maria, my housekeeper. She's a good woman, fixes up injuries better than any doctor I've known." He took a sip of water, then held the canteen out toward the girl, though she was too far away to reach it. "You must be awful thirsty." The girl's eyes fixed on the canteen. Her cracked lips and the way she unconsciously licked them told Thomas she hadn't had water in a long while, but still she didn't move toward him. Couldn't move even if she wanted to. Thomas stood slowly and walked closer, but stopped when he saw her flinch. Instead of approaching further, he set the canteen on a rock within her reach and backed away. "There you go. Help yourself when you're ready." For several long minutes, neither of them moved. The desert evening grew cooler, and shadows stretched longer across the rocky ground. Finally, the girl's thirst won out over her fear. She reached out with a trembling hand and grabbed the canteen, pulling it close to her chest before taking several desperate gulps of water. "That's good," Thomas said encouragingly. "Now, I need to get that boulder off you before your leg gets worse. I can see it's already swelling up pretty bad. No, the girl said quickly, fear flashing in her eyes again. You go. Leave me. Thomas shook his head. Can't do that. You'll die out here if that leg doesn't get treated. Could be broken, could be worse. Desert gets cold at night, and there are animals that roam after dark. Better than, she started but couldn't finish the sentence. Better than being helped by a white man? Thomas finished for her. He sighed deeply. I understand why you'd think that. I've heard the stories too, about what some men have done. Bad men exist in every people, Apache and white alike. But I'm not one of them, and I need you to trust me enough to let me help you. The girl looked away, tears now streaming down her dusty cheeks. She was in pain, terrified, and completely at the mercy of a stranger who represented everything she had been taught to fear. Thomas stood and walked to his horse, making sure to move slowly and deliberately so she could see everything he was doing. From his saddlebag, he pulled out a length of rope and a sturdy branch he had picked up earlier for firewood. He brought these items back to where the girl lay trapped. Here's what I'm going to do, Thomas explained, kneeling down but keeping his distance. I'm going to use this rope and branch to make a lever. It's a simple tool. You put the branch under the rock, push down on the other end, and the rock lifts up. My horse will help pull too. When the rock moves, I need you to pull yourself free as fast as you can. Can you do that? The girl studied the rope and branch, then slowly nodded. At least this plan didn't involve him touching her right away. Thomas spent the next hour working in the fading light. He positioned the branch carefully under the boulder's edge, secured the rope, and attached it to his horse's saddle. The entire time he talked, he told the girl about his ranch, about the cattle he raised, about Maria who made the best cornbread in the territory. He talked about Sarah, his voice catching only slightly when he mentioned how much he missed her laugh. She used to bring me flowers, Thomas said as he adjusted the rope. Wildflowers from the desert. They'd be half wilted by the time she got back to the house, but she was so proud of them I kept every one until they turned to dust. The girl listened, and Thomas could see her fear gradually mixing with something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding that he truly meant her no harm. All right, Thomas finally said, standing and checking his work one last time. When I give the signal, old Buck here is going to pull, and I'm going to push down on this lever. You get ready to pull yourself free the second you feel that rock move. Ready? The girl gripped the ground with her hands and nodded, bracing herself. Thomas clicked his tongue, and Buck began to walk forward, pulling the rope taut. At the same time, Thomas threw all his weight onto the branch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the boulder began to shift. It rose an inch, then 2 inches. Now, Thomas shouted, pull yourself out now. The girl pulled with all her remaining strength, dragging herself forward across the rough ground. Her injured leg came free just as Thomas's makeshift lever snapped and the boulder crashed back down, missing her foot by mere inches. She lay on the ground, gasping and crying, her leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Thomas could see it was badly broken, possibly in more than one place. The girl needed medical attention immediately, but the nearest doctor was 2 days' ride away in town, and she would never survive the journey in her current condition. Thomas approached slowly, hands visible. Your leg is broken, he said gently. I need to set it and wrap it, or you'll never walk right again. But I promise you, I'm only going to touch your leg, only to help with the injury. That's all. The girl looked up at him through her tears, and Thomas saw the moment of decision in her eyes. She could refuse and likely die, or she could take a leap of faith with a stranger who had so far kept his word. Okay, she whispered finally, the word barely audible. Thomas moved with careful deliberation, making sure every action was visible and predictable. He walked back to his horse and retrieved a clean shirt from his saddlebag, along with strips of cloth that Maria had given him for emergencies. The girl watched his every movement, her body tense and ready to flee despite the agony she must have been feeling in her shattered leg. I'm going to need to straighten your leg first, Thomas explained, kneeling several feet away from her. It's going to hurt something terrible, but if I don't do it now, the bone will heal crooked and you won't be able to walk properly. Do you understand? The girl nodded, biting her lower lip. Her hands clutched at the dry earth beneath her, fingernails digging into the soil as she prepared herself for more pain. Thomas had set broken bones before. Ranch life demanded a man know how to handle such things, whether for animals or people. He had set his own arm once after being thrown from a horse, gritting his teeth and doing what needed to be done. But this was different. This was a child, already traumatized and terrified, and he knew that one wrong move could destroy the fragile thread of trust they had begun to build. I'm going to touch your leg now, he said softly, reaching out slowly. The girl flinched, but didn't pull away. Thomas's weathered hands, rough from years of ranch work, were surprisingly gentle as they examined the injury. He could feel the break, could sense where the bone had snapped. It was bad, but not as bad as it could have been. On the count of 3, Thomas said, positioning his hands carefully. 1, 2, on, 2, he pulled, knowing that the anticipation was sometimes worse than the act itself. The girl screamed, a sound that echoed across the desert and made Thomas's heart ache, but the bone shifted back into place with a sickening click that he felt through his fingers. The girl was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. Thomas worked quickly, tearing his extra shirt into strips and wrapping the leg tightly, using 2 straight branches as splints. He fashioned the bandage with practiced efficiency, remembering how his own father had taught him this skill decades ago on their farm back in Missouri. The worst is over, Thomas said when he finished. You did real good. Braver than most grown men I've known. The girl's sobs gradually subsided into quiet whimpers. She looked exhausted, her face pale beneath the dust and grime. The sun had fully set now, and the desert temperature was dropping quickly. Thomas knew he needed to get her somewhere warm and safe, but he also knew he had to keep his promise about not carrying her to his house, to his bed, to anywhere that would trigger her fears. Here's what I'm thinking, Thomas said, sitting back on his heels. I'm going to make something called a travois. It's like a sled that attaches to my horse. You'll lie on it, and Buck will pull you to my ranch. That way you can see everything around you, and you'll be in control. If you want to get off, you just say so and we stop. Sound fair? The girl considered this for a long moment before nodding. She appreciated, Thomas could tell, that he was giving her choices, treating her like a person with her own will rather than simply doing what he thought was best. Thomas spent the next 30 minutes constructing the travois using rope, branches, and a blanket from his saddle. He worked by the light of the rising moon, his movements sure despite the darkness. When he finished, he positioned it next to the girl and stepped back. Can you pull yourself onto it? He asked. Or do you need help? The girl tried to move but gasped in pain. Her injured leg made it impossible to maneuver on her own. She looked up at Thomas with frightened eyes, knowing she needed his help, but still afraid to accept it. I'll just lift you under your arms, Thomas said gently. I won't touch anywhere else. You have my word. The girl closed her eyes and nodded. Thomas moved forward, slipped his arms carefully under her shoulders, and lifted her gently onto the travois. True to his word, his touch was completely respectful, clinical even, like a father helping an injured child. He settled her onto the blanket and made sure her leg was supported properly. There we go, he said, stepping back immediately. How does that feel? Hurts, the girl admitted, her voice small. I know it does, but we'll get you fixed up properly once we reach the ranch. Maria will make you feel better. She's got herbs and medicines that work better than anything a town doctor could offer. Thomas attached the travois to Buck's saddle and began the slow journey home. He walked alongside the horse rather than riding, constantly checking to make sure the travois wasn't jostling too much on the rough terrain. The girl remained silent during the trip, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. The ranch came into view after about an hour of careful walking. It was modest but well-maintained, with a main house, a barn, and several outbuildings. Warm light glowed from the windows of the main house, and Thomas could see Maria moving about inside, probably wondering where he had gotten to. Instead of heading to the house, Thomas guided Buck toward the barn. The girl's eyes followed his movements carefully, noting this deviation from what she had expected. I'm taking you to the barn, Thomas explained, as if reading her thoughts. There's a clean section in the back where we keep supplies. I'll set up a comfortable spot for you there with plenty of blankets and a lantern. The door will be open so you can see out, and you can leave whenever you want. I figure you'll feel safer there than in the house. The girl's expression softened slightly. This man kept surprising her with his consideration, his respect for her fears. Thomas settled her into the barn exactly as he had described. He created a clean, comfortable space using fresh hay covered with blankets. He positioned a lantern nearby so she wouldn't be in darkness, and he made sure she could see the barn door clearly from where she lay. I'm going to fetch Maria now, Thomas said. She's going to want to check your leg and bring you some food. She doesn't speak much English, but she's gentle and kind. You don't have to be afraid of her. The girl watched him leave, and for the first time since this ordeal began, she was alone with her thoughts. She looked around the barn, noting the neat organization, the well-cared-for tools, the healthy animals in their stalls. Everything spoke of a man who took pride in his work and treated his property with respect. Perhaps, she thought, he would treat people the same way. Thomas found Maria in the kitchen, just as he had expected. She was a woman in her 60s, round and warm, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. She had worked for Thomas for the past 3 years, ever since her own husband had died, and she ran his household with quiet efficiency. "Senor Thomas," she said, looking up from the stew she was stirring. "I was beginning to worry." "You are very late tonight. I found an injured girl out by the fence line," Thomas said, washing his hands in the basin by the door. "Apache girl? Maybe 12 years old?" "Her leg is broken bad, and she's scared half to death. I need you to help me tend to her, Maria. She needs a woman's touch right now." Maria's eyes widened, but she didn't question him. She had learned over the years that Thomas McKenna was a fair man, perhaps too fair for his own good in this harsh territory. She simply nodded and began gathering supplies: clean cloths, her box of medicines and herbs, a bowl of warm stew, and a pitcher of water. Together, they walked to the barn. Thomas called out before entering, not wanting to startle the girl. "We're coming in now. It's just me and Maria like I promised." They found the girl exactly where Thomas had left her, though her eyes were now heavy with exhaustion and pain. Maria took one look at the child, and her weathered face crumpled with compassion. She set down her supplies and began speaking in rapid Spanish, her tone soothing even though the girl couldn't understand the words. Maria examined the leg with practiced hands, making soft clicking sounds with her tongue. She nodded approvingly at Thomas's splint work, but proceeded to reinforce it with proper bandages and a poultice made from herbs she had ground herself. The girl tensed under her touch, but didn't cry out, perhaps finding comfort in the motherly way Maria worked. "She needs rest and food," Maria said to Thomas in Spanish, "and prayers. This is very bad break, but she is young. Young bones heal strong if we care for them properly." Maria spooned warm stew into a wooden bowl and offered it to the girl. The child hesitated only a moment before hunger overcame caution. She ate ravenously, barely pausing between bites. Thomas realized she had probably been trapped under that boulder for at least a full day, maybe longer, without food or water. As the girl ate, Thomas pulled up an old crate and sat down, keeping his distance but staying present. "You got a name you want to share?" he asked gently. The girl looked at him for a long moment, chewing slowly. Finally, she swallowed and spoke. "Nasha." "Nasha," Thomas repeated, trying to pronounce it correctly. "That's a pretty name." "What does it mean?" "Owl," the girl said quietly. "Owl." Thomas smiled. "That's fitting. Owls are wise creatures, smart and careful." Nasha finished her stew, and Maria immediately offered her more, which the girl accepted gratefully. As she ate the second helping, Thomas began talking again, his voice low and steady like a bedtime story. "I'm going to tell you what's going to happen next, Nasha, so you don't have to worry about the unknown. You're going to stay here in this barn tonight, safe and warm. Maria and I will be in the house if you need anything. In the morning, we'll check your leg again and bring you breakfast. You'll stay here as long as it takes for that leg to heal properly, and then you can decide what you want to do. You can go back to your people, or you can stay here and work on the ranch, or you can do whatever you want, but you'll heal first. That's the plan." Nasha listened carefully to every word, searching his face for signs of deception. But Thomas's weathered features showed only honest concern and a deep sadness that seemed to live permanently in his eyes. "Why you help me?" Nasha asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since he first found her. Thomas was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because you needed help, and I was there. That's reason enough. But also," he paused, his voice growing rougher with emotion, "I had a daughter once. She would have been about your age now. When I saw you trapped there, hurt and scared, I saw her. I couldn't save my Sarah from the fever that took her, but I could save you from that boulder. Maybe that's selfish of me, maybe it's not. But there it is. The first rays of dawn filtered through the cracks in the barn walls, painting stripes of golden light across the hay-covered floor." Nasha woke with a start, momentarily confused about where she was. The events of the previous day came rushing back. The boulder, the white rancher, the kindness that seemed too good to be real. Her leg throbbed with a dull, persistent ache that reminded her this was no dream. She heard sounds outside the barn, the familiar noises of a ranch coming to life. Chickens clucked in their coop, a rooster crowed his morning greeting, and she could hear the low murmur of voices. Nasha tensed, listening carefully, but the voices seemed calm, ordinary, going about their daily work. The barn door swung open and Maria appeared carrying a tray. The older woman smiled warmly when she saw Nasha was awake. "Buenos dias, little one," she said, setting the tray down carefully. On it was a plate of eggs, fresh bread, and a cup of milk still warm from the cow. Nasha stared at the food with wide eyes. It was more than she had seen in weeks. Before the boulder trapped her, she had been surviving on whatever she could find. Berries, roots, the occasional rabbit she managed to catch. Her family was gone, killed in a raid 6 months earlier, and she had been wandering alone ever since, avoiding both white settlements and the reservations where soldiers rounded up her people. Maria noticed the girl's hesitation and mimed eating, making exaggerated chewing motions that made Nasha almost smile despite herself. The old woman's warmth was genuine, impossible to fake. Nasha reached for the bread and took a small bite. It was delicious, better than anything she remembered eating before. While Nasha ate, Thomas appeared in the doorway. He didn't enter right away, just stood at the threshold and called out, "Morning, Nasha. How's that leg feeling?" "Hurts," Nasha admitted between bites of egg. "That's to be expected. Broken bones hurt for a good while. But Maria's poultice should help keep the swelling down." Thomas stepped inside slowly, carrying a wooden bucket. "I brought fresh water for washing up, if you'd like. Maria can help you with that when you're ready." Over the following days, a routine developed. Maria would come each morning with breakfast, help Nasha wash and change the bandages on her leg, and stay to keep her company for a while. Thomas would check in several times throughout the day, always announcing his presence before entering, always keeping a respectful distance. He would talk about the ranch work he was doing, tell stories about the cattle, or share memories of his daughter Sarah. Nasha began to relax, though she remained cautious. She watched everything carefully, looking for signs that this kindness was a trap, that eventually Thomas would demand something in return. But days passed, then a week, and nothing changed. He remained courteous and respectful, treating her more like a guest than a burden. On the 8th day, Nasha asked her first real question. "Your daughter, how'd she die?" Thomas had been checking on one of the horses in the stall nearby. He paused in his work, his hand still on the curry comb. "Fever," he said quietly. "Came on sudden one winter. She was fine. One day, burning up the next. We tried everything. The doctor from town, Maria's remedies, prayers. Nothing worked. She died 3 days after getting sick. She was 10 years old. Sorry, Nasha said, meaning it. "Thank you," Thomas replied. "It's been 5 years now, but some pains don't fade much with time. You learn to carry them, that's all. My family, too," Nasha said softly. "Soldiers come. They shoot everyone. I hide in rocks. I see everything." Thomas set down the curry comb and turned to face her, his expression filled with sorrow. "I'm sorry that happened to you, Nasha. No child should have to see such things. There's been too much killing on both sides, too much hate. I don't pretend to understand all the politics of it, but I know it's wrong when innocents suffer." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two people bonded by loss, by the understanding that grief was grief regardless of which side of a conflict you stood on. By the 3rd week, Nasha's leg was healing well. She could move around a little using a crutch Thomas had fashioned for her. Maria had been teaching her some Spanish words, and Nasha had been teaching Maria some Apache words in return. The two would laugh together at their mispronunciations, creating their own unique language of friendship. One afternoon, Thomas came to the barn with an unexpected proposal. "Your leg's healing good," he said. "I was thinking, if you're feeling up to it, maybe you'd like to help with some light chores. Nothing that requires standing for long periods, but things you can do sitting down. I'll pay you wages, same as I'd pay any ranch hand." Nasha looked at him suspiciously. "Why you pay me? I stay here, eat your food." "Because work deserves payment," Thomas said simply. "You help around the ranch, you earn your keep. That's how it works. Besides, I figure you might feel better earning your way rather than just accepting charity. Am I wrong about that?" Nasha considered this. Pride was important to her people, and he was right. She would feel better contributing something in exchange for the food and shelter she received. "What work?" she asked. Thomas smiled. "Well, those chickens out there need feeding and their eggs collected. The garden needs weeding. You can do that sitting on a stool. There's mending to be done, leather work, sorting supplies. Plenty of things that don't require running around on that leg of yours." And so, Nasha began to work. She proved herself quick and capable, approaching each task with serious dedication. Thomas noticed she had a natural way with the animals, speaking softly to the chickens as she gathered eggs, calming the horses with her gentle touch. She worked hard, perhaps too hard for someone still recovering from a serious injury, but Thomas understood the need to feel useful. News of the Apache girl living at the McKenna Ranch spread quickly through the surrounding community. It was impossible to keep such things secret in a territory where everyone knew everyone else's business. The reactions were swift and mostly negative. One morning, 3 men from town rode up to the ranch. Thomas was repairing fence when he saw them coming and felt his stomach tighten. He recognized them: John Hollister, Pete Davis, and Frank Sullivan, all ranchers from neighboring properties. They were hard men, made harder by years of conflict with Apache raiders. "Thomas," John called out as they approached, "we need to talk." Thomas set down his tools and walked over to meet them, positioning himself between the riders and the barn where Nasha was working. "Morning, gentlemen. What brings you out here?" "You know damn well what brings us here," Pete said, his face red with anger. "You got an Apache living on your property. Are you out of your mind?" "I've got an injured child recovering from a broken leg," Thomas corrected calmly. "She's not causing any trouble." "Not causing trouble yet," Frank interjected. "But what happens when her people come looking for her? What happens when they decide to raid your place, or worse, use it as a base to raid ours?" Thomas kept his voice steady, though anger was building in his chest. "Her people are dead. She's alone. And she's a child, not a warrior." "Today, she's a child," John said, leaning forward in his saddle. "Tomorrow she's grown and telling her people all about our properties, our defenses, our families." "You're being foolish, Thomas, letting your grief over Sarah cloud your judgment." That struck a nerve, but Thomas held his temper. "My judgment is just fine. That girl has done nothing wrong, and I won't turn her out to die because of what other people might do." "Then you're putting all of us at risk," Pete said. "We came here as neighbors to warn you. Get rid of the girl, send her to the reservation, do whatever you want, but get her off your property. If you don't, we'll take matters into our own hands." Thomas's voice went cold. "That sounds like a threat, Pete." "It's a promise," Pete shot back. "We've all lost people to Apache raids. We're not going to sit by and watch you harbor one of them right under our noses." "She's staying," Thomas said firmly. "And if any of you try to harm her, you'll answer to me. I've got as much right to decide who lives on my property as you do on yours. Now I suggest you ride on back to your own ranches and mind your own business." The three men exchanged glances. Finally, John shook his head. "You're making a mistake, Thomas. A big one. Don't say we didn't warn you." They rode off, leaving Thomas standing alone with his fists clenched at his sides. He knew this wouldn't be the end of it, knew that he had just made himself an outcast among his own people. But when he turned and saw Nasha peeking out from the barn door, fear evident in her eyes, he knew he had made the right choice. "They gone?" Nasha asked quietly when Thomas walked over. "They're gone," Thomas confirmed. "And they won't be coming back, not while I have anything to say about it." But trouble came from another direction as well. 2 weeks later, just as Nasha was beginning to walk without her crutch, a group of Apache scouts appeared at the ranch. Thomas was working in the corral when he noticed them, 5 men on horseback, watching from a distance. He walked slowly toward them, hands visible and empty. As he got closer, he could see they were well armed but hadn't drawn their weapons. They simply sat on their horses, their expressions unreadable. One of them, an older man with gray streaking his long black hair, spoke in Apache. Thomas shook his head. "I don't speak your language," he said. The man switched to heavily accented English. "White man have Apache girl. We know this. We come to see." Thomas's heart raced, but he kept his voice calm. "There is a young girl here, yes. Her name is Nasha. She was injured, trapped under a rock. I found her and helped her. Her leg was broken." "We see her," the man demanded. Thomas hesitated, then nodded. "She's in the barn. But I'm telling you now, she's here of her own choice. She's free to go if she wants. I'm not keeping her prisoner." He led them to the barn, calling out to Nasha before entering. "Nasha, there are some Apache men here to see you. They're concerned about you." Nasha appeared in the doorway, and her eyes widened when she saw the scouts. She spoke rapidly in Apache, explaining what had happened. The older man listened carefully, his eyes moving between Nasha and Thomas. The conversation went on for several minutes. Thomas stood quietly, not understanding the words, but watching the body language carefully. Finally, the older man turned to him. "Girl says you help her. Save her life. Treat her with respect." He studied Thomas for a long moment. "This is unexpected. Most white men would not do this thing. Most men, white or Apache, are better than the worst stories told about them," Thomas replied. "At least that's what I choose to believe." The older man almost smiled. "Perhaps. Girl says she want to stay here. Learn white man ways, but not forget Apache ways." "She can do both," Thomas said. "I'm not trying to make her into something she's not. I'm just giving her a place to heal and grow." The scout considered this, then spoke again to Nasha in Apache. She nodded, looking between him and Thomas. Finally, the man extended his hand to Thomas, a gesture that seemed to surprise even his companions. "I am Delshay," he said. "Nasha is daughter of my sister. I thought her dead with the others. You have done good thing, helping her." "This I will remember." Thomas shook his hand firmly. "She's a good girl. Works hard. You're welcome to visit her anytime." The seasons changed slowly over the Arizona territory, marking time in ways that had nothing to do with calendars. Nasha had been at the ranch for nearly 2 years now, and she had transformed from a frightened, injured child into a confident young woman of 14. Her leg had healed completely, though she still walked with a slight limp when the weather turned cold. More importantly, the fear that had once clouded her eyes had gradually been replaced with something else: determination, curiosity, and a quiet strength that reminded Thomas of his own daughter. Delshay had kept his word about visiting. Every few months he would appear at the ranch, sometimes alone, sometimes with other members of Nasha's extended family. These visits had become easier over time, less tense, more like normal family gatherings. Thomas would share coffee and conversation with them, and Maria would prepare extra food. The Apache visitors would bring news from the reservation, stories of their people and small gifts, beadwork, woven baskets, or herbs that Maria eagerly added to her collection. During these visits, Nasha would speak Apache with her uncle and the others, her words flowing easily in the language of her birth. But she also spoke English now with increasing fluency, and she had picked up Spanish from Maria as well. She moved between these three worlds with a grace that amazed Thomas, never fully abandoning one for another, but finding ways to honor all parts of who she was becoming. The ranch itself had become more prosperous under their combined efforts. Nasha had proven to have a remarkable gift with horses. She could gentle the wildest mustang, reading the animal's moods and fears with an intuition that seemed almost magical. Thomas had started buying untrained horses cheap and letting Nasha work with them. Once gentled, they sold for 3 times what he paid, bringing in money that helped expand the ranch and hire additional workers. But acceptance from the wider community remained elusive. The neighboring ranchers still viewed Thomas's household with suspicion and hostility. In town, people would cross the street to avoid him. His old friends stopped visiting. The preacher at the church had even suggested, in his roundabout way, that Thomas might be more comfortable worshiping elsewhere. Only the shopkeeper, Mr. Chen, a Chinese immigrant who understood something about being an outsider, still treated Thomas with warmth and respect. One evening in late spring, as the three of them, Thomas, Maria, and Nasha, sat down to dinner together as they did every night, Delshay arrived unexpectedly. He wasn't alone this time. With him were 3 other Apache men, including one Nasha didn't recognize. Their faces were serious, and Thomas felt his stomach tighten with worry. "Delshay," Thomas said, standing from the table. "Welcome. Will you join us for dinner?" The older Apache man shook his head. "We come to talk. Important talk." He glanced at Nasha, and something in his expression made her go very still. They gathered in the barn, which had become the unofficial meeting place for these visits. Thomas lit several lanterns as everyone found places to sit. Nasha sat close to Thomas, and he noticed she was trembling slightly. Delshay spoke first, his English slow but clear. "Nasha, you have been here 2 winters now. Your leg is healed. You are strong again. It is time to come home to your people." The words hung in the air like smoke. Nasha's hands clenched in her lap, and Thomas felt his own heart begin to race. "This is Dakota," Delshay continued, gesturing to the younger man Thomas hadn't recognized. "He is son of respected warrior. His family has good standing on reservation. He wishes to marry you when you are of age. His family offers good bride price." Nasha's eyes widened, and she looked at Dakota for the first time. He was perhaps 20 years old, handsome in a traditional way, with strong features and the bearing of someone raised to be a leader among his people. He met her gaze steadily, but not unkindly. "Uncle," Nasha said softly in Apache, then switched to English so Thomas could understand. "I am honored by this offer, but I am only 14. I am too young to think of marriage." "You are young now," Delshay agreed. "But in 2 more years, you will be of age. Dakota's family is willing to wait. But you must come back to live with us now, learn the proper ways of an Apache woman, prepare for your future role. You have learned white man ways here. That is good. But you must not forget who you are or where you come from." Thomas cleared his throat. "With respect, Delshay, shouldn't this be Nasha's choice? She's old enough to have a say in her own future." One of the other Apache men spoke sharply in their language. Delshay responded, and a heated exchange followed. Finally, Delshay turned back to Thomas. My companion says you have no right to speak on this matter. You are not her family. You are not her father. Delshay's voice was firm but not hostile. But I say you have earned right to speak because you saved her life and cared for her, so I listen. But this does not change what must be. Nasha is Apache. She belongs with Apache people. Nasha stood up abruptly, her voice shaking with emotion. I am Apache, she said, speaking to her uncle in English, but clearly wanting everyone to understand. I will always be Apache. Nothing can change the blood that runs in my veins or the memory of my mother and father. But I am also myself, Nasha, a person with my own thoughts and dreams. Uncle, you say I must come back to learn Apache ways, but I have not forgotten them. You have visited me, taught me, reminded me. And I say I am not ready to leave this place yet. Dakota spoke for the first time, his English better than Delshay's. You prefer to stay with white man, to live in his world rather than with your own people? There was hurt in his voice, and judgment. It's not about preference, Nasha said, turning to face him directly. Thomas gave me shelter when I had none. He treated me with kindness when he could have left me to die. He asks nothing from me except honest work. He does not try to make me forget who I am. Is it wrong to honor that? It is not wrong, Delshay said quietly. But it is complicated. You live between two worlds, child. This cannot last forever. Eventually you must choose. Why? Nasha asked, her voice rising with passion. Why must I choose? Why can I not be both Apache and someone who has learned from the white man's world? Why must everything be one way or the other? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Thomas could see the conflict on Delshay's face, the struggle between tradition and the changing reality of their world. The Apache way of life was being squeezed from all sides. The reservations, the soldiers, the settlers. Perhaps Delshay saw in Nasha's question the same impossible choice his entire people were facing. Finally, Delshay sighed deeply. He spoke in Apache to his companions, a long speech that none of the others could understand. Men argued back, their voices growing heated. But Delshay was clearly the leader, and eventually the others fell silent. I will speak with tribal elders, Delshay said at last. This is an unusual situation. My sister's daughter should be with family, learning from the women of our tribe, preparing for her future as Apache wife and mother. But he paused, looking at Nasha with something like sadness in his eyes. The world is changing. Maybe old ways must change too, a little. Maybe there is value in daughter of Apache learning to walk in both worlds. He turned to Thomas. I ask you, white man, if Nasha stays here, what is her future? She cannot marry white man. Your people will not accept this. She cannot be rancher's daughter. She has no legal standing in your world. What life can you give her? It was a fair question, one that Thomas had wrestled with himself in quiet moments. I can give her choices, he said carefully. I can teach her to read and write, to manage land and livestock, to stand on her own feet. When she's old enough, she can decide for herself what kind of life she wants, whether that's returning to live with your people, staying here to help run the ranch, or finding some other path entirely. But that decision should be hers to make, not ours. And if she chooses to stay? One of the other Apache men challenged. If she chooses white man's world over her own people? How will you feel then, Delshay, knowing your sister's daughter rejected her heritage? She's not rejecting anything, Thomas said firmly. She's just asking for time to grow up and figure out who she wants to be. Is that so wrong? Dakota stood and walked over to Nasha. He looked at her for a long moment, studying her face as if trying to see into her heart. You are very different from other Apache girls, he said finally. Bolder, more independent. Perhaps this is a good thing, perhaps not. Time will tell. He turned to Delshay. I will wait, he announced. 2 years, 3 years, however long it takes. If she chooses to return to our people, if she chooses to honor the old ways, then I will be honored to take her as wife. If she chooses a different path, he shrugged, then that is the will of the spirits, and I will accept it. Nasha looked at him with new respect. Thank you, she said quietly. That is very kind. Delshay stood as well, and Thomas could see the weight of leadership on the older man's shoulders. He was trying to balance tradition with compassion, duty with love for his sister's child. I will speak to the elders, he repeated. I will tell them you are safe, that you are learning skills that may help our people in future. I will tell them you have not forgotten who you are. But Nasha, his voice grew stern, You must visit reservation. You must spend time with your people, let them see you, know you. You cannot be Apache only in name. You must show this in actions. I will, Nasha promised. I want to know my people, Uncle. I want to learn from the women, hear the old stories, understand the traditions. But I need time here, too, to learn other things that may be useful. What things? One of the men asked skeptically. Nasha straightened her shoulders. I can read English now. I can write. I understand the papers and documents that white men use to take our land. I know their laws, or some of them. I can speak their language without accent. Maybe these skills seem worthless to you, but in the future our people will need those who can walk in both worlds, who can speak for us to the white government, who can understand their tricks and deceptions. The barn fell silent. It was a bold statement from a 14-year-old girl, but there was wisdom in it that even the skeptical Apache men couldn't entirely dismiss. Delche nodded slowly. You have your mother's wisdom, he said. She, too, could see beyond what was to what might be. Very well. You may stay here, but with conditions. You visit reservation every few months. You learn from our women. You participate in our ceremonies. You do not forget your people, even as you learn from white man. Agreed? Agreed, Nasha said without hesitation. Thomas felt relief wash over him, but it was mixed with understanding of what this meant. Nasha would always have divided loyalties, would always be walking a difficult path between two worlds that didn't want to share her, but perhaps that was exactly what was needed. People willing to build bridges instead of walls. After the Apache men left, Nasha stood in the doorway of the barn, watching them ride away into the twilight. Thomas came to stand beside her, giving her space but offering his presence. Did I do the right thing? She asked quietly. Asking to stay? Only you can answer that, Thomas said. But I think you spoke from your heart, and that's never wrong. Though I won't lie to you, Nasha, the path you've chosen won't be easy. You'll face rejection from both sides. White people will always see you as Apache first, and some of your own people will see you as too white, as someone who abandoned her heritage. I know, Nasha said, but maybe someday there will be more people like me. People who can be both, who don't have to choose one world or the other. Maybe I can help make that possible. Thomas smiled, his heart full of pride for this remarkable young woman. Maybe you will, he said. Maybe you will. The years passed like water flowing through the desert, sometimes rushing with urgency, sometimes slowing to a gentle trickle. Nasha kept her promise to Delche, visiting the reservation regularly, learning from the Apache women, participating in ceremonies and traditions. She learned to weave baskets in the traditional way, to prepare food using ancient methods, to speak the formal Apache used in spiritual gatherings. The elders watched her carefully at first, suspicious of this girl who lived among white people, but gradually they came to accept her presence. During one such visit, an old woman named Desba pulled Nasha aside. Her face was creased with 1,000 lines, each one telling a story of survival and loss. You walk a difficult path, child, Desba said in Apache, her voice like dry leaves rustling. I see you trying to hold two worlds in your hands, and I wonder if your arms will grow tired. They already are tired, grandmother, Nasha admitted, using the respectful term for an elder. But what choice do I have? If I abandon one world for the other, I lose part of myself. Desba studied her with eyes that seemed to see through to her soul. That is wisdom beyond your years. But remember this. Being a bridge means people will walk on you from both sides. You must be strong like the oak, not brittle like the dead branch. Those words stayed with Nasha as she returned to the ranch time and again. And Desba was right. The criticism came from both directions. In town, when Nasha accompanied Thomas to buy supplies, women would pull their children away from her, whispering warnings as if she carried some disease. Men would make crude comments just loud enough for her to hear, suggesting she was Thomas's property in ways that made her skin crawl with disgust and anger. But on the reservation, some of the younger Apache men viewed her with equal contempt. They saw her fine clothes, her ability to read and write, her comfort in the white man's world, and they called her a traitor. Once, a young warrior named Cochetta confronted her publicly, demanding to know if she thought she was too good for her own people now. I think I am exactly good enough for my people, Nasha had replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Good enough to learn the skills that might help us survive in a world that is changing whether we want it to or not. When soldiers come with papers to take more of our land, who will read those papers and understand their tricks? When traders cheat us with false numbers and contracts, who will challenge them? I do not think I am better than anyone. I am trying to become useful, Cochetta had no response to that and eventually walked away, though Nasha could feel his resentment like heat from a fire. Through all of this, the ranch became more than just a home. It became a symbol of something new, something that frightened people precisely because it challenged their understanding of how the world should work. Thomas continued to face isolation from his white neighbors, but he bore it with quiet dignity. Maria, now growing elderly but still sharp as a tack, served as the household's heart, keeping everyone fed and binding their small, unusual family together with her love and her excellent cooking. When Nasha turned 16, Thomas made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I'm making you a partner in the ranch," he said one evening over dinner. "Not legally, because the law won't recognize such an arrangement with someone of Apache heritage, but in truth, you've earned it with your work, particularly with the horses. We're making good money now, better than I ever did alone, and it's fair that you share in the profits." Nasha stared at him in shock. "Thomas, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay and help me build something worth having," Thomas replied. "I'm getting older, Nasha. My bones ache in the morning, and I move slower than I used to. This ranch needs young energy, young ideas. You've got both." "What about Dakota?" Maria asked gently. "He still waits for you, child. He asks about you when he visits." Nasha had not forgotten about Dakota. He had been patient and kind, never pressuring her, but making his intentions clear. He was a good man, respected among his people, and he would make someone a fine husband. But every time Nasha thought about accepting his proposal, something held her back. "I respect Dakota," Nasha said carefully, "but I'm not sure that life is meant for me. The life of a wife on the reservation, bearing children, cooking, sewing. It's honorable work, important work, but when I think of doing only that for the rest of my life, I feel like I'm suffocating." Thomas nodded in understanding. "Then you need to tell him truthfully. He deserves to know where he stands, so he can move forward with his own life." The conversation with Dakota came during the next visit to the reservation. Nasha asked him to walk with her away from the others, to a place where they could speak privately. The sun was setting, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. "I know why you want to talk," Dakota said before she could begin. "You are going to tell me your answer is no." Nasha felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm sorry, Dakota. You've been so patient, so kind. Any woman would be fortunate to marry you, but I cannot be that woman. My path is taking me in a different direction." "The white man's path," Dakota said, and there was sadness in his voice, but not anger. "Not just the white man's path," Nasha corrected. "My own path. I want to help our people, but I want to do it in my own way. I want to learn more, do more, be more than tradition allows for women. Does that make me bad?" Dakota was quiet for a long time, looking out over the desert landscape that had been home to their people for countless generations. "No," he finally said. "It makes you Nasha. I think I've always known you were not meant for ordinary life. I hoped, perhaps foolishly, that love might be enough to change your mind. But I see now that asking you to be ordinary would be like asking the eagle to stop flying and live like the chicken. It would destroy what makes you special." "Thank you for understanding," Nasha whispered. "I do not fully understand," Dakota admitted, "but I accept. I wish you well, Nasha. I hope you find what you were looking for." He turned to go, then paused. "One thing I will say, be careful. The world is not kind to women who refuse to stay in their proper place. It will be even less kind to an Apache woman trying to make her own way. You will need to be stronger than you have ever been." "I know," Nasha said. "I'm ready." But she wasn't fully ready for what came next. When Thomas turned 65, his health began to fail. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away, then progressed to weakness and weight loss. The doctor from town, who came reluctantly when Maria practically dragged him to the ranch, diagnosed consumption tuberculosis. There was no cure, he said. Thomas might have a few years, or a few months. There was no way to know. Nasha threw herself into running the ranch, determined to keep everything going while Thomas rested and recovered what strength he could. She managed the workers, negotiated sales, handled the accounts. Some of the ranch hands, particularly the older ones, resented taking orders from a young Apache woman. Two quit in protest, but others stayed, impressed by her competence and her fair treatment of them. Thomas watched her work from his bed, where he spent increasingly more time. "You're going to be fine," he would tell her on his better days. "You're stronger and smarter than I ever was. This ranch will thrive under your care." "Don't talk like that," Nasha would scold him. "You're going to get better. Maria's medicines will work." But they both knew the truth. One evening in late autumn, as the temperature dropped and the first hints of winter touched the air, Thomas called Nasha to his room. Maria was there too, her eyes red from crying. "I need to tell you something," Thomas said, his voice weak but clear. "I've written a will. I've left the ranch to you." Nasha's breath caught. "Thomas, the law won't honor that. You said yourself—" "I know what I said," Thomas interrupted. "The law is unjust. But I found a lawyer in Tucson, a man with more conscience than most. He's helped me create documents that should hold up, at least for a while. You'll have to fight for it, probably in court. But the ranch is yours, Nasha. You've earned it 100 times over." "Why?" Nasha asked through her tears. "Why would you do this for me?" Thomas smiled, and for a moment he looked like the strong rancher who had found her under that boulder so many years ago. "Because you're the daughter of my heart, even if not of my blood. Because you remind me every day that Sarah's death wasn't the end of everything, that I could still love, still be a father even after losing my child. Because you showed me that the divisions between people are lies we tell ourselves, and that kindness matters more than the color of skin or the accident of birth. And because someone needs to show these people that the old ways of hatred and division don't have to continue forever." Thomas McKenna died 3 weeks later on a cold December morning. He went peacefully, with Maria holding one hand and Nasha holding the other. Delche came for the funeral, along with several other Apache, standing respectfully at the graveside alongside the few white people who had remained Thomas's friends. It was a small gathering, but meaningful, a testament to a man who had lived according to his conscience rather than the prejudices of his time. The fight for the ranch began almost immediately. Thomas's distant relatives, people who had never visited him or shown any interest in his life, appeared with their own lawyers challenging the will. They argued that an Apache woman had no right to own property, that Thomas must have been mentally incompetent when he wrote the will, that Nasha had somehow tricked or manipulated him. The legal battle stretched on for 2 years. During that time, Nasha ran the ranch with grim determination, making it more profitable than ever, as if to prove she deserved what Thomas had left her. She found allies in unexpected places. The lawyer from Tucson who had helped Thomas, Mr. Chen from the general store who testified about her character, even some of the ranch hands who spoke up about her competent management. Delche and the Apache community also supported her, though in quieter ways. They spread word that anyone who interfered with Nasha would answer to them. It was a delicate balance, supporting her without seeming to threaten white authorities, but Delche navigated it with the skill of someone who had spent his life walking similarly difficult paths. In the end, the judge ruled in Nasha's favor. The ranch was legally hers. The victory sent shockwaves through the territory. An Apache woman owning land, running a successful ranch, employing white workers. It challenged everything people thought they knew about the natural order of things. But Nasha didn't stop there. She began hiring Apache workers from the reservation, paying them fair wages and treating them with dignity. She created an informal trading network helping Apache craftspeople sell their goods to white buyers in town, taking only a small commission that she used to fund a school for Apache children, teaching them to read and write in both English and Apache. The ranch became a meeting place, a neutral ground where people from both communities could interact as equals. It wasn't always easy. There were incidents, conflicts, moments when old hatreds threatened to destroy everything Nasha was building. But she persisted, guided by the memory of a white rancher who had looked past her skin and her heritage to see simply a child in need of help. Years later, when Nasha was a woman of 30, she sat on the porch of the ranch house as the sun set over the desert. She was older now, her face weathered by sun and wind, her hands calloused from work. She had never married, had never had children of her own. But the ranch was her child, and the community she had built was her legacy. Maria, ancient now but still alive, sat beside her in a rocking chair. "Do you ever regret it?" the old woman asked. "The path you chose? You could have had an easier life." Nasha smiled. "Easier, perhaps, but not better, not truer to who I am." She paused, remembering that day so long ago when she had been trapped under a boulder, terrified of the white rancher approaching her. "Thomas taught me something important that day he found me. He taught me that fear doesn't have to dictate our choices, that we can choose kindness even when the world expects hatred, that one person's decision to see the humanity in another can ripple outward in ways we can't imagine." She looked out over the land that was now hers, at the barn where Thomas had first given her shelter, at the corrals where she had learned to gentle horses, at the fields that represented years of hard work and determination. "This ranch isn't just land and buildings," she said softly. "It's proof that the old divisions don't have to last forever, that people can change, can grow, can learn to see past their differences." In the distance, she could see a group of Apache children playing with the children of white ranch workers, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. It was a small thing, children playing together, but it represented everything Nasha and Thomas had worked for, a future where heritage mattered less than character, where the accident of birth didn't determine the limits of possibility. "He would be proud of you," Maria said, following Nasha's gaze to the children. "I hope so," Nasha replied. "I try every day to honor what he gave me. Not just the land, but the belief that one person's compassion can change the world, one small act of kindness at a time." As darkness settled over the Arizona territory, Nasha remained on the porch, keeper of Thomas McKenna's legacy and architect of her own. She was neither fully Apache nor fully part of the white world, but something new entirely, a bridge between worlds, just as old Desba had predicted. And though the path remained difficult, though she still faced opposition and prejudice from all sides, she walked it with her head high, knowing that every step forward made the journey a little easier for those who would follow. The ranch that had begun as a simple act of mercy, a rancher refusing to ignore an injured child's plea for dignity and respect, had become something much greater, a testament to the transformative power of seeing the humanity in others, regardless of the barriers that society erected between them.